All right, this is always outnumbered, always outgunned. Letter, chapter, letter to Theresa. Socrates had been sick for 3 days. It was the intestinal flu, and it was bad. His stomach rejected everything, even water. He lay back in his fold-out sofa bed, dehydrated and feverish. Dehydrated means that he doesn't have any water in his body. Worried that they'd fire him from his job at Bounty's supermarket just because he didn't have a phone and couldn't call in sick. There was a pay phone 3 blocks away, but he hardly had the strength to make it from one room to the other. The first 2 days he forced himself from the bed to drink water and urinate, means to pee. But by day 3 he had cracked lips and a dry tongue. He couldn't even think about moving without getting dizzy. He would have wet his bed except for the fact that there was nothing left in him to wet with. Nobody dropped by to visit, and Socrates rued anew that he had no phone. To rue is to feel bad that. So he was upset that, again, he had no phone. He knew that he was dying for lack of a friend to hear his call. Mostly he slept, dreaming about prison and childhood friends. He dreamed about his mother, too, her strong voice echoing down the empty gray cell block, calling to him from the grave. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Socrates opened his eyes, but was still dreaming. Theresa stood there at the foot of his bed. He wouldn't have come awake then, even if Warden Johns came down and demanded it, even if God called Judgment Day with his great golden hammer. Theresa, yeah, baby. At the sound of her voice, he was a young man again, coming home from a beating. He couldn't remember why he caught such hell. That means to get beat. He didn't even remember who he'd been fighting. But Theresa didn't ask. She cradled him in her lap and put a wet towel on his forehead. She put a hand against his chest while the cold tendrils of water, or little drops of water, trickled down his neck and shoulders. Shh, she whispered. Baby, shh. When he woke up, he was still dreaming. Theresa was waiting for him, and his cuts were bandaged. Hi, baby, she said. He remembered her in tan slacks and one of his torn t-shirts. Her face was like a mirror, every cut and bruise reflected in her concerned eye. I'm sorry, T, he said. When are you going to stop doing this, Socrates? I don't know. Something snapped or cracked or fell down in the other room, but Socrates held Theresa's eye. Because, she said, because I can't always be fixing you up. I can't spend my whole life worrying about you. The pain in his head came from words he couldn't get out. They pounded against the inside of his skull. He tried to wet his tongue to say something, but there was no saliva. Don't go died in his throat. He tried to say don't go, but he couldn't get it out. What's that you said, Sacco? Darrow asked. Huh? The skinny boy was at the foot of the bed where Theresa had been standing. Pour some water on my head, Darrow. What? Pour some water on my head. After some coaxing or convincing, Darrow poured water from a gallon pail over Socrates' shoulder, neck, and head. The ex-con leaned over the side of the bed so as not to wet his mattress. He moaned loudly as the cold water rushed over his fevered skin and onto the concrete floor. Darrow went out for aspirin and broth. Broth is like a water in which vegetables or chicken has been cooked. He fed Socrates by hand for 2 days. Where did you learn how to take care of a sick man? Socrates asked when he was on the mend, or when he was feeling better. My mother took care of me, didn't she? The boy responded. Saul Epstein was happy to see Socrates back on the job. When you're around, everybody seems to work harder, the assistant manager at Bounty Supermarket said. He believed that Socrates had been sick. He even authorized sick pay for the time that Socrates was out. Sick pay is when you're sick at a job and they actually pay you even though you didn't come to work. For days Socrates worked, wondering when was the last time he felt so healthy and well. He slept soundly each night, but still he felt as if he had been aware. I don't understand the sense. He slept soundly each night, but still he felt as if he had been aware, so that if somebody came into the room, he would have known it, just as if he were awake, with his eyes open. Oh, I understand. So as he's sleeping, he feels like he's not asleep. He's actually feeling like he's awake, and he's aware of what's going on in his room. So he's like active dreaming. On his first day off, he woke up early and went to the table in the kitchen. He began writing a letter in pencil on a pad of Holiday Inn notepaper that he had bought second-hand, or used, at the Army surplus store. Section 3. Dear Theresa, the letter began, I saw you in a dream the other night, and so I wanted to say hi. For the next hour he sat there reading and rereading his sentence. It was all true, but it didn't go anywhere. He couldn't talk about the flu and the pain in his head, about Darryl and the water. He didn't want to sound sickly in asking for help. If he saw her, it would be okay. She'd see that he was independent now. I guess I want to see you, he wrote. I do want to see you. And then I could tell you about prison and how you were right. I know you probably married and got a lot of kids now. I know you probably are married and have a lot of kids now. Socrates stopped again. He reread again. He wondered if he knew her husband. He wondered how old her kids were. He counted up the years. 35. One when she was still writing him in jail, and then another a year later. Maybe as many as 12. Her oldest child would be in his 30s, the youngest no younger than 23. Grandchildren too, probably. I miss you, T. I almost died from flu, and I thought about you. You were always asking when I was going to stop being so crazy. I never said anything to that because I didn't want to be lying. You know I wanted to stop. But what if I said I would, and then I didn't? I've stopped now. I've been out of prison 8 years and more. I've been solid. I got a job and an apartment. I have friends, and there is this teenage boy I have been helping. I know you married, T. I know that because you wanted it, and you always did what you always wanted to do. I remember when you took me up to your father's grave at Haven Home. I remember you said he was laying in the ground, but he was still more than most of those men walking around on 2 legs. I remember that. I know you did not mean me, but even still, it was about me anyway. But I'm not like that anymore. I can take care of myself now. I don't get into trouble, even when it's not my fault. I would like to hear from you, T. Just 2 friends talking. I will put my address down below. If you get this letter and you want to write, then you can. Socrates signed the notepaper and wrote down his address. He sent it from the main post office at Florence and Central. He remembered Theresa's mother's address because her mother's name was Rose, and Rose lived on 32 Rose Street. Section 4. Sylvia Marquette had a little store that dealt mainly in candy bars and soda pop, potato chips and beer. But at the back, behind the standalone cooler, she kept a block of copper mailboxes. Sylvia's market was Socrates' mailing address. No, Mr. Fartlow, Sylvia said, there isn't any mail for you, no. Her face was squashed in on itself, no forehead to speak of, and little chin. She was quite dark except for her eyes. The whites of the ugly woman's eyes were like 100-watt bulbs. A 100-watt bulb, watts are how we measure the amount of light that comes out of a light bulb, and a 100-watt light bulb is quite bright. Why are you coming in here every day, Mr. Fartlow? I used to only see you once a week. I'm expecting a letter, he said. A check? Sylvia's eyes increased their voltage. An old girlfriend, he said. Oh, the shopkeeper cooed. To coo is to say something in a sweet voice. Her voice had become low and very sexy. That stuff is better than money sometimes, except if you're hungry. Except if she's gone, Socrates added. They both laughed hard. All right then, Socrates said, concluding their play. I'll see you tomorrow. Good seeing you any time, Mr. Fortlow. Sylvia's voice was sincere. Socrates was feeling good as he left the little store, even though he'd come to realize over the 4 weeks since he'd sent his letter that Theresa was gone for him. Forever. Again. In his sleep, Sylvia was still laughing, but instead of a happy friend, she sounded like a cartoon witch, cackling and savoring his pain. Her hot coughs battered against his eardrums and soured his stomach. In the middle of the night, Socrates woke up feeling as if the flu had returned. If he stayed awake, he was okay, but if he dozed or fell asleep, or even lay down, the laughing returned, and with it the sick stomach. You should take the day off, Mr. Fortlow. You look bad, Sol Epstein said. There was concern in his wrinkled white face. No, man, no, let me do another shift. Another shift? You look like you should be in the hospital. I can't sleep, Mr. Epstein. Maybe if I work 2 shifts, I'll be tired enough to go to bed. What's wrong? The daytime manager asked. It's these dreams, man. Not dreams, really, but like things I see and hear in my sleep. Sol Epstein was a short man, strong on top and fat underneath. His hair was the kind of gray that seemed to be blue. He had the cruel, slate-gray eyes of a taskmaster, but his smile, when he smiled, made him a kind uncle. So a taskmaster is a person who gives tasks to people. And we often say a taskmaster is a person who's really, really hard on people. He smiled then. You might need some help, Socrates. What kind of help? A counselor, psychologist, something like that. Oh, only counseling I need is to work my butt off until I can't see straight anymore. That's what I need. Socrates was thinking about the prison psychiatrist. All he'd done was to give tests with circles and squares on them. That and pass out drugs. Can I stay? Socrates asked. Sure, said the kind uncle. Section 5. He worked 7 shifts in 4 days and stopped picking up the mail from Sylvia Marquette. He drank a half pint of whiskey while listening to the cool jazz radio station every night. Nothing helped. He couldn't sleep. He was losing weight, and his hearing had turned strange. Sounds had become louder, tinny. Sometimes he didn't hear what people said at all. Whenever anyone spoke to him, it seemed as if they were speaking Chinese or some other foreign language. He looked older in the mirror, and for the first time in his life, he felt weak in his arms and hands. He knew that he couldn't win a fight with his hands, and so he started carrying a knife again, and listening closer to the foreign language that everyone around him was speaking. He was listening for threatening tones. One day he was watching Sol Epstein from the back of the store. Sol was giving his kind uncle smile to Noah Hoag, a young box boy. Socrates remembered Sol's advice to him about a counselor. He knew that it was his only chance. The next day, Socrates took out his delivery push wagon. He dropped off groceries for Watson, Kirkby, and Stein, $8.75 in tips. Then he went down the long Beverly Hills alley that was better paved and maintained than most of the streets in Watts. He passed behind a house that was on Chaldee Lane and quickly pushed his cart through a redwood doorway, parking it behind a stand of rose bushes. He knocked on Mrs. Hampton's back door, but he knew that she was in Miami visiting her dying sister. He put on his work gloves, took the key from the light fixture over the door, and let himself into the small house. White walls trimmed with green and dark wood furniture decorated every room. Small photographs of relatives stood on each windowsill. The smell in the cool air was faint and sweet. Socrates delivered a brisket roast or 2 small chickens, bell peppers, potatoes, and frozen containers of diet lemonade to Mrs. Hampton every Tuesday. Sometimes she'd call in to add to that order. She had told him about the key for days when she was out. And if she was out, there was always a $4 tip waiting for him on the dinette table next to the phone. There was no tip today. Socrates sat at the table and peered through lace curtains out onto Chaldee Lane. A horn tooted or sounded somewhere, and Socrates realized how quiet it was in that house. No one talking, no loud banging. You only had to remember the exchange to dial this number, because the last 4 digits were the letters GIRL, Girl. Girls, a pleasant woman's voice said. What kind of girl do you want, sir? Blonde, brunette, Asian baby? I want to talk to Theresa, Socrates said. The pleasant voice hesitated a moment. Maybe she heard the deep violence and despair in him. Just a moment, she said. The phone clicked and there was dead silence. After a few seconds, Socrates began to wonder if they had hung up. Hello? It was a black woman's voice. Theresa? Another hesitation, and then, yeah, who's this? It's Socrates. Oh, hi, Socrates, she said, loud and happy, it seemed, to hear an old friend. What do you want me to do for you? You want to hear what I have on? How are you, Theresa? I'm fine, real fine. Uh-huh. You know it's been a while. Yeah, the woman answered, her voice more subdued. What is it that you want from me, Mr. Socrates? I just want some talk, is all. Talk about what? She asked, hardly pleasant at all. I want to talk to Theresa. And what is it that you need to say to me? Are you Theresa? I am right now. Yeah. Now what did you want to have to say? Now what did you have to say? Because, I can't be listening to no weird stuff, baby. It's just been a long time and I want to catch up, that's all. Have you been sick? Telephone Theresa asked. Socrates coughed out a harsh laugh. Yeah, that was the last thing on a whole line of things. I was sick and I dreamed about you. What was I wearing? She asked. You had on those tan slacks and that old t-shirt of mine. It was all beat up and you put a cold towel on my head. Tears were coming from Socrates' eyes, but he kept the crying out of his voice. Uh-huh, the woman said. What else? I don't get into trouble like that anymore. I don't get into fights every night. I only drink in my house sometimes. You know I learned some things, Theresa. I'm out of jail, and I'm not going back there anymore. Yeah, baby, that's good, the woman answered. What do you want to do now that you're out of jail? You miss being with a woman when you were first in there? The first few years it was difficult, but not anymore. I've got it now. I figured out that living is kind of like music. You know what I mean? Like when you walk, Every step is the same length and takes the same amount of time. And your heart, too. Even your eyes blinking is pretty much the same beat, unless something gets messed up. Maybe something gets in your eye or you've got to run. Telephone Theresa made the quick, hollow breath of a half yawn, but Socrates didn't care. He went on, and if you could keep up that beat, there isn't any reason to be drunk or mad. How long were you in jail? Theresa asked. 27 years. And did you miss your girl all that time? I thought about you every night. I knew you were right. I knew that I did wrong, but it was like I couldn't help it. I thought about all the children and good times and even the bad times we could have had. Maybe I'd have gotten fat and lazy drinking beer on the front porch, while you were on the phone to your girlfriends and yelling at the kids to stop all that horseplay. Horseplay is messing around, being loud, yelling at each other, stuff like that. I thought about it so much that I probably lived it more than if I was free. Did you miss my body? The woman asked. Yes, I did. Another horn honked on the street. Weeks later, when Socrates was telling Wright Burke about what a crazy fool he had been, breaking into Mrs. Hampton's house and trying to call the woman of his dreams, he remembered that horn. It was Telephone Theresa's dirty talk and that horn, Socrates said to Wright at the checkers table at McKinley Park. That made me wake up. Wake up, the maimed vet said. Maimed means to have an injury. You were sleepwalking? Yep. Ever since I had that flu, I have been in a dream. She was so real, man. I believed that I saw her. I even tried to write. Here I haven't spoken to her in 35 years, and I'm trying to write to her a letter, trying to call her on the phone. Wow, Wright said, rubbing his chin with his paralyzed claw. You were way out there, huh? Did you really think that was your old girlfriend on the phone? I wanted it to be right. I wanted to pretend so much that maybe a little bit I thought it was real. The woman I wanted was gone. Gone. Chapter 6. A month passed. Socrates had settled back down into his routine. He slept every night straight through, getting up only twice to go to the bathroom. Mrs. Hampton didn't seem to suspect him of breaking in and using her phone. Maybe she was so rich that the $10 or $12 just slipped by her. Maybe she complained and the telephone company let it go. Darrow was growing every day. His voice got deeper and his walk became graceful. He was doing the push-ups that Socrates had showed him, and his arms grew thicker and firm. Socrates was coming home from work one day when a woman called out to him, "Mr. Fartlow! Socrates, hey!" Sylvia Marquette came up to him. The full sun on Central Avenue did not, in any way, dim the brightness of her eyes. "You haven't been by in 6 weeks, Mr. Fartlow," she said. "No," Socrates agreed. Something about the woman still disturbed him. Her squashed-down face, the hairs that sprouted from a black mole on her right cheek. "You got that letter," she said. "Dear Mr. Fartlow, it's been many years since I even thought your name. For a long time I hoped that I would never hear of you again, and, God forgive me, sometimes I even hoped that you'd never get out of that jail. But your letter touched my heart, and I finally thought to write and answer your questions. I'm sorry that it has taken so long, but I'm blind now, and I had to wait for my granddaughter, Kova, to come by and read your letter to me. My daughter, Theresa, married Kristen Jones in 1961. They gave me 4 beautiful grandchildren, including Kova, who is writing this letter, and then moved to Los Angeles. They had 4 more children there. Kristen worked at McDonnell Douglas for many years, and then he died from diabetes. Kristen was a healthy eater, but his bones and organs just couldn't take all that weight. Theresa saw her last baby, Teju, through college, and then she collapsed from all that work. She was admitted to Falana Rest Home on Kristen's health insurance, but she never recovered. Theresa Childress Jones died on November 3rd of last year. She is survived by Malcolm Kova, Mr. Sandy, Kristen Jr., Minnie, Lana, and Teju. All of her children are healthy and well. Most of them have good jobs, though Teju and Lana have become artists. I know that you cared for my daughter, Mr. Fortlow, and I'll tell you that Theresa lived a good life. She was happy and rich in love. I never heard her say a harsh word about you, and I know it broke her heart to see you go to jail. Theresa Childress Jones is buried at Valley Rest in Pomona, next to her husband. There's a plot to her left for me, Mr. Fortlow. I'm 84, and so I'll probably be coming out to rest next to my daughter before too long. I'm glad that you found some peace, Mr. Fortlow. I know that Theresa would have been glad too. Sincerely yours, Rose Childress. It took 3.5 hours by bus to get to Valley Rest. Socrates got there on an overcast and warm afternoon. Her slender marble headstone stood elegant and straight next to Kristen's. His stone was wider and not quite as tall. On each stone there was merely a name and the dates. Socrates wanted more. He wanted an address and a phone number, an invitation to her house when everyone was there on 4th of July. He wanted Nat King Cole on the record player playing out of the window and a cold beer on the patio with the both of them. He and Kristen, talking about work and where they had come from in Indiana. Theresa calling the children over one by one to meet the man who could have been their father. He would have been standing right here right there on that spot for Kristen's funeral. Theresa would be vulnerable, but he wouldn't take advantage of her. He'd offer consoling talk to help her feel better, money, or to fix things around the house. He'd hold her hand and tell her that she had 8 kids and one old friend who needed her not to die. He wanted to take her back to Rose on Rose Street. He wanted, for the first time since he was young, to go back home. He could have walked with her down Rose to Thatcher and down Thatcher to 32nd Street, just to see where the streetcars used to run with an old friend who had forgiven him. He wanted to hear that forgiveness. Socrates stared at the graves for over an hour, wanting. His jaw clenched to keep from shouting at the stones. His heart beat erratically and fast. In prison he had learned to live without desire, and now that he had let desire in, he wanted everything. All that wanting wore on him until the only desire left was to lie down and sleep on Theresa's grave. But he knew that it was wrong. He knew, beyond that it was probably against the rules. He stood there wavering over the grave. "Hey, mister," a voice said. He was a small black man dressed in a too warm brown suit and wearing a short-brimmed hat. He might have been Socrates' age, but looked older, more resigned. "Yes," Socrates said. "Are these your people?" the man asked. Socrates nodded slightly. The man peered at the stones, mumbling numbers on his lips. Socrates realized that he was figuring out their ages. "It's a shame how so many black folks die so young," the man said. "Oh, I don't know," Socrates said loudly. The trees shimmered green and silver under pearl-gray skies. "I think a whole lot of our people put more into a year than some others might do. Sometimes it just takes an hour, and you have done a lifetime."